Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain and welcome back. Now today I want to talk about something that's kind of been playing around my head for a while because it relates to those things that I talked about so long ago, right back at the beginning of the channel, that I should probably redo at some point, considering that I'm sure that there are a lot of you that have more recently subscribed that probably don't know what I'm talking about when I'm referring to the three R's. But the three R's were a concept of kind of what makes personal strength. You've got these three elements of it, and there you go. But I'll go into it in another time, or feel free, there's a playlist for them, in fact, I believe, so you can go back and watch those. But there's another trio of elements that stand out to me, and it's something that stands out to me because of the arguments, that we see going on around these kind of things. And those are the three kind of elements that make up what people perceive as being adult, as growing into being a mature individual. And those three elements are dignity, confidence, and independence. And they can mean an awful lot of things to an awful lot of different people. And that's, I feel, where we see a breakdown in communication between previous generations and more current generations. But as a result, let's go through each one of these individually, and then we will expand on where the problems are further on. So first off, dignity. Lots of people will use these words in various different ways, but dignity in the case that we're talking about here is being able to kind of walk with your head high without shame. Yeah? You can be dignified covered in mud, you can be dignified with no clothes on, you can be dignified with everything else in your life falling to pieces around you. And the main kind of core of that is that you are acting with purpose, you are acting of your own volition, you are acting without shame. You are not shamed of what you are doing. There at no point is guilt or shame or sadness or upset or anger towards yourself, by yourself, for what you are doing. There might be from other people, but that's not that's where we get into some of the conflicts later on, which we'll discuss. Confidence, though, confidence is fairly straightforward. It's the capacity to move past limitations, mostly the limitations put on yourself by fear. And so as a result, it's that substantial strength that you can bring to bear, that you have a capacity to move outside of your comfort zone without crumbling. You can move happily into that stretch zone, and your stretch zone is the largest part of the zones that you live in. Your comfort zone may be medium sized, but your stretch zone is basically this long, open, winding expanse that you can play in. And your panic zone should be a small sliver around the edge of that, just to make sure that if something goes horribly wrong, then that's where you end up. And then independence. I mean, independence is one that's kind of easier to quantify, but not. Oh shit! Knocking stuff off my desk, but not always easier to kind of agree on. Because lots of people go, oh, well, independence is you living the way you want to, with the people you want to, doing your own thing, having your own money, all that kind of stuff. But then if you look at it between different cultures in the West, it's very much as soon as you're an adult, you should be out the door and off and on your way and whatever else. Whilst in, say, certain Asian countries, it's very much more a situation where you might have your own money, you might have your own access to things, but you would still live very much as part of the family unit, and you'd be very, very secure there. You might not even move out. It might be a case of more people moving in, and so it's very much a case of independence being the one that's kind of maybe harder to put a pin in, to kind of really define, because it can very much depend on where you come from and how you were raised as to what you regard independence to be. And so now let's talk about the conflicts that we're seeing. So firstly, you've got dignity is one that I keep hearing, and in part it's because dignity is something that keeps being kind of thrown as a spear by traditionalists who tend to be older. And oh, it's not dignified to do this, it's not dignified to do that, and so on and so forth. But what happens to be dignified changes over time, firstly, but also there were more than enough people in the past who, even though it wouldn't have been dignified by societal norms to do a thing, they were never questioned on it, they were never confronted with it, because they were able to demonstrate a level or a lack of shame and a level of dignity in the way that they acted to prevent others from attacking them for it. It's very much a case of if you see someone who, if you did it, you would feel shame, you'd feel terrible. You see someone else do it, and there's a reasonable chance that, oh, well, good for them. There's a reason why we see so much of that in things like reality TV. These people who are doing things that really aren't dignified in terms of societal norms, but because they're doing them without shame and without kind of any kind of second thought, possibly because they're too dumb to realise what they're doing, but sometimes they do it in a very calculated way to make a point, to stand out. And as a result, those people tend to be fan favourites. They tend to be the people that pick up the most interest. And, where you've got a number of reality TV show stars who have literally got to the level of fame, notoriety, financial success, purely because they've done stuff that other people wouldn't do, and they've done it in a way that they don't hate themselves for it. It stands out as marking them as strong and different. Now, looking at it in a more kind of normal life situation, this is the whole people kind of appreciating when you are you, when you just accept yourself. It's why people like Simon Pegg, when he makes a point of kind of enthusing about how nerdy his appetites are, and how engrossed in the worlds of science fiction and fantasy he happens to be. And he's not ashamed by it. It's just what he likes, and as a result, he gets applauded for the way that he puts himself across on those topics. Why? Because he's doing so in a dignified manner. He's not showing shame. He's not demonstrating any kind of weaknesses in himself that others can exploit. And as a result, other people respect that. Other people kind of wish that they could do that. And so, that's the dignity side of things, where you've got people who are lying and cheating and being vicious, miserable individuals at times. One of the people who always springs to my mind, who starts to try and weaponize dignity, is Nigel Farage, who lies, misinforms, twists words, quite frankly talks out his arse, acts in a very hypocritical fashion, and yet firstly, he carries himself off without shame, and so that's why people kind of attach themselves to him. That's why they feel he has this charisma. He's not actually the most charismatic person by a long shot. He's repulsive, but they wish that they could have the same lack of shame, the same confidence in himself that he has, and so they attach themselves to him. And so it's a kind of difficult thing to look at him and go, well, that's that. But then when he turns round, it gets even worse, because he starts throwing out how people who protest aren't dignified. The young people who are doing this, that, and the other, Remain and Project Fear, and they're all terrible, and they're all doing these undignified things. When his side of the campaigns that he was involved in over the referendum, with the comments he's made and the actions that he's making, are very two-faced. They've literally been caught with their pants down in many instances, and so as a result, he's using the word as a weapon. And firstly, he shouldn't be allowed to do that in the first place, in my opinion, considering his actions, to one degree or another. But also, the only way to combat that is to ensure the level of dignity that you have is equal or exceeding to the person attacking you, which is why I've commented before about protests that have turned into riots and all that kind of thing, you are going to feel some negative pushback, and not just negative pushback from just, oh, you were protesting, but negative pushback in the terms of kind of legal proceedings, you potentially getting hurt, you feeling stupid and sorry for yourself afterwards. And that stupid and sorry for yourself afterwards is the thing, that's the shame, that's the upset that crushes your dignity. So if you're going to protest, by all means, but don't let it turn into a riot. Don't do something stupid. Be there peacefully, be there constructively, and so on. But that's the kind of the point that I wanted to make there. Confidence is a tough thing, and it's a thing that a lot of people kind of struggle with. I know that I did for a long time, but it comes down to in part the personal strength side of things, in part just the opening up to the world and not always being afraid of things. And sometimes that's easier said than done, sure, but it's probably the most cut and dry thing here. But it's where you've got people from an older generation who don't understand the stresses on modern people, like younger people today, who have grown up in the world that we live in at the moment rather than having any other point of reference. And it's also the same the other way around, where you've got young people not understanding the backdrop the older generations have. And so this is where the arguments around things like confidence come into play, because the things that matter now to young people, things that matter now to certain individuals, things that are far more apparent now than they ever used to be, things like mental health, things like the various forms of implicit and explicit discrimination in various places, the number of additional legal issues that can spring up from otherwise quite innocuous things. It's all stuff that's very present in the mindset of people that have always lived with it, and not as present in the mindset of people who have not. And so, or have been able to move past it without seemingly worrying that it's there. And so, when it comes to confidence, where you have, I don't agree with safe spaces, but where you have people arguing for safe spaces, the pushback on them is probably far more than it needs to be, simply due to the lack of understanding and the different appreciations of what confidence is and what it should be. And so when you've got people arguing for some kind of refuge, a place for them to hide, a place for them to secure themselves because life is so hard for them, rather than looking to help, looking to develop, it becomes very much an attack on those things. Do I feel that those things should exist myself? No. Safe spaces and so on, they create too much of a comfort zone when we grow in our stretch zone. So, it's only ever, those kind of environments are only ever causing a stagnation of the people that enter them. But do I feel like the people that go into them need to be attacked for them kind of being erected in the first place? No, they need to be helped. They need to have their hand held and their confidence bolstered, possibly by the experiences of people who have lived through a different set of surroundings and situations, different set of perspectives. And they need to be led out into the rest of the world, into their stretch zone, so that they don't have to continually retreat. Is that what we're seeing at the moment? No. Mostly because, again, no one's talking about what they mean before they then start talking. So when you've got people talking about what confidence is and what why all of these things matter, they're not agreeing what they mean first. So when they're saying confidence, one person is thinking, oh, well, it means that you can go and just talk to people. You don't get just stopped by silly little things. And the other person is thinking that they're already confident in X number of ways, but not enough ways. And so it becomes a very single idea versus a very kind of nuanced and faceted idea. Or it could be that one person sees being able to talk in front of a lot of people as being very confident trait, whilst the other person doesn't see that as a confident trait, that they just see that as a necessity, and then confidence is something beyond that, and so they're expecting too much or more from the person who's got the lower bar for themselves. And these are things that need to be agreed at the beginning of discussions before moving forward. Unfortunately, no one ever has the time to do that. Firstly, on a usual basis, but also when it actually comes to specific discussions being had, these are very rarely things that occur. There's too many knee-jerk reactions, too many rushes to attack and have your say and all the rest of it. Not enough time taken to take a step back, calm down, and understand where you both are on the same level. So you're actually having a conversation on a flat plane as opposed to trying to communicate across a small mountainscape, a small kind of area of hills and troughs. So it's something that's important to take away in that regard. But then also the last one, independence. Now this one is the one that is a real kick in the teeth for a lot of people, especially a lot of the students, a lot of the people that I've worked with who have been younger, who have had to return home, who have finished university and have had no money coming in, no nothing, and they've had to go back to parents. People who want more independence for themselves, but where they just in a situation where they're struggling for various different reasons. And I've been in these situations. I'm kind of in one of those situations where I am at the moment, just because things are progressing and kind of growing at a rate that's maybe slower than I would like. But it still comes down to independence is the one that's the economic issue. And it's the economic issue that's kind of difficult, because everyone's frame of reference in the discussion is different. And again, we're not discussing where all of these things are, where the facts are, how we're all agreeing on certain terms. And so where in the past you had a greater parity between the amount that people were earning and the house prices and the price of necessities, but somewhat higher interest rates, it's still kind of added up to a very different economic landscape, where now you've got low interest rates, but you've got low earnings and very high costs for everything. And so as a result, it creates a very different dynamic that people are going to have to move through. But if you've already got an established pinpoint from way back when, that's what you're going to go and try and recall from. So that's where you've got the older generation, in many instances, looking at independence as you need to move out, you should have a car, you should have a family, you should have everything by now, why don't you? As opposed to the situation that we find ourselves in, where in many instances, the modal income in the UK is between £15,000 and £17,000. That's much lower than the figures that are usually either the mean or the median, which are both inaccurate figures that are usually fed to you by government and business spokespeople. And so as a result, it becomes a situation of looking at that number and then looking at the fact that, especially where most of the jobs are in the southeast, or around certain big cities, Manchester, Leeds, wherever, it becomes a situation where, at the very least in this country, there is such a huge disparity between the amount of money that people are earning for full day's work and all the rest of it. Even if you've got several people in a household or working, they're then not necessarily going to be able to afford all that much with that put together. Getting things like mortgages is very, very hard to get hold of, and now more so than before, simply because of the amount that you need to put down as a deposit. If it's a 10% of a £400,000 house, then that's a huge amount of money for people who aren't even earning that a year, who are earning less than half of that every year, and that's not even taking into consideration the amount that they would have to kind of put together every month for things like their bills and just food and keeping themselves alive. So the points of reference for those people, where you've got people who had maybe a harder time after the fact with higher interest rates, but an easier time of getting their foot through the door, where now you've got complete opposite way round, where it's really, really hard to get your foot through the door on the independence that you're apparently supposed to have, but then after the fact it becomes somewhat easier. It's kind of swings and roundabouts, but it's where you have families breaking down over the habits of people and how they aren't able or are able to achieve the level of independence that is expected as either a social norm or as something that has been decided by someone. It's a pretty horrid situation, and especially considering the world is becoming more uncaring and more mercenary in many ways, it becomes so difficult to tackle all of these situations so that the discussions can take place in a constructive way. And that's why I wanted to make this video. I was having a discussion about these kind of topics with several people, and the strain that it puts on their lives, just because people aren't willing to sit down and agree what they mean by these terms: dignity, confidence, independence. Just because they're not willing to sit down and agree to what those terms mean before they start the discussion. And even then, the discussions could go absolutely horribly. But because there's not that forethought, because there's not that moment of kind of reflection and understanding between people, it kind of causes a collapse in anything positive that could come out of those discussions, anything positive that could move forward from them. And especially when one party or kind of you have this division between people that prevents them from listening to each other. Oh, back in my day is a line that is no doubt said by many people from the prior generations to their now children about the situation that they're in. And it's like, yes, but we're not in your day anymore. And the young people are probably going, yes, but it's not like that. But then they don't have the capacity to hit the right points, ask the right questions, find the right way forward, just because they don't have a point of reference to try and compare with. They don't have all of the information. And this is why education is important anyway, but also why finding these things in yourself. Dignity, finding a place where you can shed your own shame and not worry about it anymore. Confidence, where you find the strength to stretch yourself. And independence, where even if you're stuck with yourself, with your parents, dependent on other people, whatever, you find your limit on what you can do for yourself and you do as much of it as possible. It can be hard, it can be difficult, but also without having those other people around you, it would be even more difficult. Suffice to say, try not to take it for granted, and try and make sure that you're working as hard as possible. It can be difficult to try and show people how hard you are working, especially if you're doing something, I don't know, like there are a number of artists that I know where they spend hours and hours and hours just basically locked away from the world. And yeah, there's a product at the end. But then again, depending on people's appreciation of art, people's appreciation of things, they may not see that as a worthwhile result at the end. In which case, they could be trying as hard as possible to kind of progress, grow within their art, develop things for themselves, and yet there's a good chance that other people around them aren't necessarily going to see that. It becomes a case of talking people through it, showing people what you're doing, and it can even then still be very difficult to do, but hopefully the amount of appreciation that goes both ways as a result of these discussions, especially if agreements on what you mean by dignity, confidence, independence, and any other nebulous term that's being thrown around, needs to be kind of nailed down to what it means first before you can have a solid conversation on it. Anyway, these were just some thoughts that I wanted to go into. In regards to confidence, there's stuff there already. In regards to the other two, dignity and independence, if you're interested in me doing other videos on those, please let me know down in the comments. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the video later. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video or found it interesting, please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the video later. Take care.